So I hope that you guys are all feeling good this day. And just to give you a brief explanation for the people who are new here about this CyberPatient Expert Series, this is an ongoing collection of webinars consisting on highly yield topics given by a wide variety of healthcare professionals. And the goal of this series is for students and faculty members to directly engage with accomplished experts, build connections, and support the future of medicine and healthcare for professionals and patients alike. And for today, what we're going to be doing is, well, today is the fourth and final episode of our Learning in Healthcare Education series. And the aim of this event is to bring together students and faculty to discuss, learn, and challenge the different ideas and perspectives on fundamental theories behind education. If you have been attending this webinar before, in the last 3 previous sessions, Dr. Qayumi introduced us to the basic theories behind education and learning. We also checked the framework on the competency-based education and how we can design a curriculum that answers to the changing needs of society and of the students. But for today, we're continuing our learning journey and exploring what's behind gamification. And the subtopics that we will be exploring are firstly getting familiar with what is gamification. Also, we will be identifying what are the main elements of gamification, to understand gamification within the context of medical education, and finally, to be familiar with the concerns of the use of gamification in medical education. By now, I think you all know that our today's speakers are beloved Dr. Karim Qayumi. And Dr. Qayumi boasts 50 years of teaching experience and is an award-winning innovator, entrepreneur, and teacher. He has achieved many accomplishments as a director of research for Cardio-Vascular Surgery, founder and director of the Center of Excellence for Simulation Education and Innovation at the University of British Columbia. He is also the chair of Technology-Enabled Learning and regional director for the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada. Dr. Qayumi is also the founder and CEO of Can Health International, a registered Canadian nonprofit charity that aims to equalize health education in developed and developing countries. And of course, he's also the CEO and founder of CyberPatient. So without further ado, I introduce Dr. Qayumi to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriela, for a very good introduction. I guess I should share my screen first, right? Okay. I am a little bit messy on my screen, so I have to quit a few things here. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. Okay, my dear colleagues, respected guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to again extend my appreciation and thank every one of you for participating in this lecture series. As I have said before, by no means I'm an expert on anything, but I'm just here to share my experience with all of you in the hope of learning from each other. When I do these kind of lecture series, believe it or not, I learn more from you than you learn from me. So as it was described by Gabriela, we did in the past talk about educational philosophies and theories behind education. We talked about competency-based education. We talked about curriculum development. And today I have been asked to talk about gamification in medical education. So by the end of this presentation, you will be familiar with gamification ideas and concepts, identify the main elements of gamification, which is very important. Understand gamification in medical education. You will understand the concerns on the use of gamification and medical education. And in the end, I may give you just one or two slides of CyberPatient as a sample of gamified medical education. So to start, by definition, gamification is the application of game mechanics in real life situations. So this application has been done for a long time. So if you remember Olympic Games, so those were perhaps the first time when the real life events were gamified. And yes, you know, perhaps in the city of Olympus in Greece, every 4 years they had a competition between athletes, writers, and also other musicians. So today, musicians and writers are taken from Olympics out, but in the beginning it wasn't. After 4 years, they would do this competition, and they will give the winner an olive crown or a medal to signify their status as being unique amongst other athletes or writers or musicians. Aztec civilizations also used gamification in their life events. They had these games of that looks like handball, basketball, and they did give badges in crowns after the completion of the game for the people who were the superior athletes. In the Middle Ages, people used chess game, and there were it was a very popular game that was gamifying the art of war. And it was used in the beginning for princes and princesses and maybe major generals that the king wanted them to train their brain into strategy of how to win a war. So in the competition, and that made this gamified process. But in 1700s, schools started to have exams, which means that they introduced an element of gamification into the education. And in 1900, there was some psychoanalytic reward management programs. And you remember in the 50s, we talked about this in previous lectures, teaching machines, scanners, and after scanner, there was a lot of teaching machines to gamify the teaching process. But today's understanding of gamification actually belongs to this man, Nick Pelling. He, in year 2000, he was first to use the term gamification. And then in 2008, the term gamification was used for computer programs and platforms on the internet. And by 2010, gamification, modern gamification using computers and softwares become very popular. And still the popularity is there, but still there are some debates on whether these gamification of education as a whole is appropriate or it's more damaging to the students. Although there is a huge amount of research that proves the efficacy of gamification, but still there are some concerns that we talk about in the near future. So when you look at today's life, our life is all covered by gamification. And there are certain types of gamification where we get rewards. So we get rewards, different type of rewards. We have tangible rewards, we have intangible rewards, we have both combination of tangible and intangible rewards, or maybe we have gamification only for the purpose of advertisement in profit making. So the tangible rewards, good example of that would be perhaps point systems in airplanes, in stores, and other places you go, coffee shops. So as soon as you gain certain points, then your points you can transfer into money. Like in airlines, you can take your points and use it for upgrades, or you can buy actually a ticket that costs money otherwise, or you can buy maybe even gifts in the airplane or certain stores in the airport. So, so these points could be turned into tangible rewards. Some, I think, credit card companies are nowadays, collecting the points, and in the end, every year they give you $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 even cash back from that as a reward. So these are all part of the tangible reward, but there are intangible rewards that the games will give you. For example, Yelp, Google Calendar, and GPS. They don't give you money, but they make your life easier. For example, if you are getting together with your friends and want to go to a restaurant, so you go to Yelp and then you find the cheapest, best, whatever you want in your friends, and then you can put that in a Google Calendar. All your friends would know where to come and when to come, and then you can make the reservation seamlessly. And then when your friends are coming, they put their GPS and they seamlessly coming into that event. So that event that you have actually was rewarded intangibly by different gamified applications such as Yelp, Google Calendar, and GPS. Some rewards could be tangible and intangible, and that's mostly the status. The status is mostly, it should not be tangible, it's mostly intangible. Like, for example, an Olympic medal, it's a status. Or for example, super elite in a airline point system is just a status. I'm a super elite. But there's a lot of things attached to that status that are not money driven. For example, if you have super elite, you can just go and check your bags separately, and you're better than other people, you're treated better, and so on. But the Olympic people, for example, when they have the medal is just a status. But once you get the medal, then you can write a book, you can give lectures, you can turn that later on into tangible assets for yourself because of that status that you have. A good example of that would be US presidents. When they leave the office, they become very rich is because of their status, going to different places for fundraising, giving lectures, writing books, and doing other things. But anyway, I'm not going to talk about advertising thing because it's more like money-driven and business-driven issues. So the second issue that we would like to talk about is to identify the main elements of gamification. And that's very important because without that, we may not understand what's the difference between toy and a game. So to understand what is the difference between toy, gamification, and a game, we have to look into the elements of a game, of gamification. And in order to understand that, we have to make sure that we know the MDA framework. So MDA framework when I heard of this, when people hear of this, they connect MDA with McDonnell Deadwyler, which is a Canadian technology company that built the Canadian arm in this space. And they are very famous, and everybody thinks, oh, MDA. But MDA framework for gamification does not mean that. So what it means it stands for mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. So the AMDA framework breaks down the utilization of the game into these three parts of dynamics, mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper on these mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics, because sometimes they're very confusing. They're confusing because we use them for other purposes, and they have different connotations. For example, mechanics, in simple word in interpretation, it's a branch of mathematics that studies the motion and forces that causes the motion. Sometimes we use the word static mechanics as referring to the part of a machine. But in here, we are not talking about physics. So we have to take those kind of thinking out of our mind. Here we're talking about, when we talk about mechanics, we're mostly talking about the literally connotation of mechanics. In literature, the mechanics means mostly embedded narratives. So the narratives are the part of the story when one story finishes and it goes into another story, the same part, to the next part of the story. And it's embedded inside the story. So if the narrative is written in the story, so that would move on into the next stage. So that's called, in literary connotation, that's what mechanics means for a writer. Because when you're making a game, actually you're doing a storyboard. So you're writing a story. You're writing a sequences of events that occurs in that game. So therefore, in gamification, in the context of MDA framework, mechanics means embedded narratives. What it means is that these are factors that they are they're moving when a event is completed. The factors supporting that event move into the next factor, the next event. So that is called the mechanics of the game. So, but mechanics of the game also could be interpreted differently by different people. For example, to players, it means rules of the game. But to the designer, it's a controlling mechanisms or actions and that controls behavior. So a good examples of mechanics of a game, in addition to the rule, which is important for the player, also it's a leaderboard, rewards, points, and badges. Those are all an integral part of the mechanics of the game with respect to the MDA framework. Dynamics of the game, the second element, is also, if you look from the physics perspective, it's a branch of mechanics that looks into specific parts in motions, forces within that interaction. But in literature, it means emergent narratives. So what emergent narrative is that these are narratives that are not written by storyboard. It's not in the storyboard. They're not written by the creator of the game, if it's a game, but as a result of interaction between the mechanics and the player, these emerging narratives appear. It's a product of that relationship. So that's why we look at dynamics in the context of MDA framework as an emergent narratives, okay? So again, this element of gamifications is also viewed differently by different people. By the player, it's the system that creates the desirable game experience. So it's the system itself. But for a designer, it's an interaction between the mechanics and player. So what would come out of that? What would those emergent narratives would be? It would be like feedback, as in the form of a feedback, progress that you make in the game, time pressure, behavioral moments in others. So the third important part of MDA, which is A, stands for aesthetics. So aesthetics actually is a branch of philosophy that looks into beauty. So appreciation of beauty. And people in the history of mankind had different understanding and different views of aesthetics. For example, ideologists, they always thought that beauty doesn't exist. It is subjective. It's not objective. It's a subjective because it's created by our brain. So it really doesn't exist. It's a very subjective matter. While the materialists were saying, no, beauty is objective because it's in an object. We're not saying nothing is beautiful. We're saying a flower is beautiful, a human is beautiful, a carpet is beautiful, a tree is beautiful. So you're relating to an object. In that object, when we say this object is beautiful, it means that beauty is in that object. And Immanuel Kant actually maybe solved this problem a little bit and come up with a better idea of saying, yes, beauty is in the object. We don't deny that, but it is reflected by our brain subjectively. So you combine the objectivity and subjectivity of that, which means, which we say, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, right? So this is a huge philosophical discussion about aesthetics, but aesthetics in the literary connotation, in the context of MDA framework, simply means interpreted narratives. So interpreted narratives are the narratives in the story that would come from the user as a emotional, sensational, or issues that would give difficulties for the person to go forward in the game. So these are more like emotional aspects of the game. It's called the aesthetics of the game. So for player, again, aesthetics is mostly goals of the game. But for designers, it is an emotional response. How do they emotionally respond to the game? So some elements in that to see is perhaps fun, like fun. When you have fun playing a game, then that game has a good aesthetics. When you have a sensation and two brothers are doing the same game and fighting with each other and getting excited, that means that the game is effective. Or some people have in the game fantasies. Challenge is very important in the game. The more challenge you have, the more engagement you have. And then achievement, when you have achieved something, then you can say, oh yeah, I did I did well. So you feel good about yourself. So there's internally, you're satisfied with the game. When you do discovery, each part of the story, when you go from one thing to another thing, like in CyberPatient, when you go from history taking and complete that, you have a feeling of achievement, but you also go for the next discovery, which is the physical examination, or how to deal with this patient, where to put it. It's all, every minute, every second, you have a feeling of discovery that would satisfy you as a human being. So, so these are the three most important elements of the gamification that would define the difference between toy gamification and the game. So now that we know all these elements, toy is a playful design and does not have any elements in rules and the goals of a game, but it's entertaining. So it's just entertaining. A gamification has a specific goal and maybe some elements of a game, but not all elements of the game. But a full-fledged game should have characteristics of all three important elements, which is mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. Then we can call that a full-fledged game. You have to understand that those elements are huge. Everybody is coming with a new sub-elements. And now somebody's publishing about 47, somebody about 80 different elements that most of them are not useless and not used. But some of those elements during time become important for gamification, as we describe here. So now that we understand and identify the elements of gamification and we understand how it works and what it stands for, we're going to go into our next section, where we just we ask ourselves what is important in the gamification for medical education. So if you're talking about medical education and gamifying medical education, we have to first think about the curriculum design and curriculum concept that last time we talked about, right? If you remember, to refresh your memory, we said the modern curriculum has to have these components, which is learning objectives, content or syllabus, methods of delivery, assessment of the learner, and the feedback. So if you don't have any of this, you cannot call this a curriculum. These are the main pillars of a curriculum. So to gamify, I think some of these pillars of curriculum, such as learning objectives and methods of delivery, is naturally gamified, is natural to gamify. But things like content, assessment of learner, and feedback, you could easily easily gamify. So, what to do to gamify them? Perhaps it's important to capture the attention of the students with respect to content, assessment, and feedback, to make sure that they are engaged when they are reading or attending a course or reading a book or anything else on the lab. Make sure that the gamification influences behavior, so it is an agent of change for behavior. And also make sure that the medical education is fun. So if you consider all these issues, then I think you would be able to do a very good gamified curriculum. So to go a little bit more in depth of some of the things, for example, the content, or three things that we talked about. Content is very important because this is the most boring part of education, that people are reading, or listening to, people like me, and they're bored of it. So to make that interesting, we have to make it, aesthetically pleasing first. If your content is aesthetically pleasing, the students would be more engaged. For that, we should use the multimedia, for the content. If you do multimedia, then you use all types of memories, like audio memory, visual memory, tactile memory, and you would remember the colors, everything. Everything will have an impact. Those are factors to impact your memory, to make it, to remember it faster. And also, you can use animations, and use animation in the context of competencies. Then, because competencies are the other part that people have difficulties learning, when you make them animated, then your curriculum would be very rich and very useful, and your students would love it. Also, it would be very good to make your curriculum interactive, particularly the content of your curriculum interactive, to make it the interface simple. Because a lot of people, when they do the interface, they put so many gadgets and things, and it's so complicated that the student gets lost on the interface. Please do many interface exams in assessments by students, by your constituency, by people who are going to use this. And then you can make changes accordingly, so that it is so simple that anybody can go through it and will have an enjoyable time. A lot of people likes to put technology, a lot of technology into the, so they think if you put more technology, more, it will be more interesting for students, but it is not. It happens not by physicians, in teachers of medical education. It happens with medical education softwares and programs are made by technologists. Because technology, oh, I know this can do this, and this can do that. And in the end, our most important issue in the curriculum, which is learning objectives, is lost, because people has to has to learn those technologies, how to use it, and how to make a sense of it. And it's very important to consider the style of learning, because if I will have time, I will talk about this a little bit later. But the style of learning, you remember we talked about this the lecture before last one, and technology, gamification is a very good time for you to make your software or your game develop in a much open concepts. So every style would find itself within that game. When you make the curriculum a gamified curriculum, then don't forget to put formative and summative assessment into your game. If you don't have that, then you don't have education, once. Second is that actually, if you summative assessments and formative assessments are actually an important elements of gamification. So when you do it properly, students would not hate the exams, they would enjoy the exams, they would enjoy communicating with you in a formative evaluations and assessments. Feedback is also extremely important. You remember, as I said last time, the chariots will make a circle back into the point. So your feedback will go back into learning objectives to improve your curriculum constantly, right? And that feedback is also an element of the game, as you saw before. So, and in the end, make sure that the education is fun and it create cooperation between the students, that the students can work together. And nowadays with the internet, students can work from different parts of the world on the same issue, on the same patient, on the same case. And also to provide some competitions that not everybody at this time is doing. So now we are going to go to the understand the concerns on the use of gamification in medical education. There are some concerns, so we have to talk about this now a little bit more in detail. So if you look at the concerns of medical education, you have to first think that medical students are naturally driven. So medical students, they're mature students, are coming to medical school with intrinsic, motivations. Some may have also extrinsic motivations, such as money, but being a doctor, making more money. But I don't believe that majority of students will have that in mind. Majority of students are coming to medical school because they know they can take that. They have the cognitive value to carry that load. They are emotionally driven. They want to help. They want to help, and they want to learn to support humanity in be a good human being in the social context. However, when the students are coming with external and internal motivations into the medical school, trying to learn medicine, when we impose gamification on them, we impose some extra external, extrinsic rewards. We provide extrinsic rewards and extrinsic motivation for them. So is this good? I don't believe it is good. And that's where the problem is. Because usually intrinsic and extrinsic motivation are balanced. So a student comes, as I mentioned, have more intrinsic values than an extrinsic, but he also has an extrinsic value, which is nothing wrong with that. Making money, there's nothing wrong with making money. But when we're gonna do with the game, put more emphasis on additional extrinsic values or extrinsic motivations, then we disbalance the extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. In fact, we're inflating the extrinsic rewards. We're inflating the extrinsic motivations, and we are undermining the intrinsic motivations. When we do this for 4 years of medical school or 6 years of medical school in some countries, we come up with a very bad problem that's called over-justification effect. So what over-justification effects would do to people is that the real incentives that we're coming to would be undermined by fictional incentives, and they lose values and trust. So this, is the most important issue, the most problem with gamification of education as a whole, but particularly gamification of medical education. Of course, to mitigate that, we can put in our gamification factors that would promote intrinsic motivations. If we are going to increase also the intrinsic motivations in our curriculum, then we may have to introduce the curiosity, for example, the challenges in the curriculum. We go to recognitions, incorporation. These are perhaps the four, maybe there are many more, but these are perhaps the four important pillars that would support your curriculum to not lose the balance. Okay, it's a very powerful tool for students to move forward into their career. Sorry about that. So aside from this major point that I brought to you, there are some other factors that are negatively affecting an educational process. And I took from the literature some of the importance to bring it to your attention. For one thing, people say too much screening time would be not good for students. But nowadays, I don't believe that the case, because from my granddaughter who is 18 months old is sticking in the screen, to all the adults in the university levels. We all are in the screens. But how that screen is designed, how that the screen functions, how that screen brings value to you, particularly education, pedagogical value, that's very important. Some people say that games aren't always created equally. Yes, if you use different games, people have different values, people have different a way of understanding games. So not every game is equal. So if you fully gamify your medical school curriculum, that will be a disaster, because there's going to be so many different games that would pull students' attention to different directions. So games can be a source of distraction. Yes, sometimes it is, particularly for K-12 students. But I think for mature students, as we talked about andragogy, you remember, adult learning, that would not be a major problem, because we're more focused on specific issues. And at this time, internet actually gave us a lot of information. So it requires a technology learning curve. That is something that is important, and it's not that important. It's important because, remember, as I said, that if a technology person is developing a game for a medical education and there's like too much technology in it, it's so difficult to learn it, the interface is so complex, then I would say, yes, that's true. But if you design a very good interface with the least amount of technology that would support your learning objectives, then I think this would not be a big problem. It doesn't replace traditional learning strategies. Of course it doesn't. So I agree to that. It will never, I wouldn't say never, maybe for the next 100, 200 years, it would not be able to replace the real learning strategies, and it shouldn't. And in games and in computer programs, platforms should be an add to the medical education. It should be a support for better understanding, better learning, but not replacing anything. The lectures, the labs, the clinical rotations, they all has to, even simulation centers and physical simulation, that all has their own merits. The online games in gamifications should support to improve that process. Not always aligned with the teaching or learning goals. That's also true. I have seen a lot of games that people in the industry developed that has no education values, that have no education goals, no learning goals. So there's just an interesting, so that I will call as a toy. If it doesn't have a goal, remember, it's a toy. It's not a gamified or a full-fledged game. So considering all that, my recommendation that would be first to lack of planning and strategy would cause all those things. So have a good strategy and plan from the beginning if you're gamifying your your curriculum to know exactly what you're doing. You don't have to have a bad process. You have to have a very consistent process on how to implement that with your students. A poor design, we already said, that would be disastrous. And also unrealistic expectations. Yes, that is a disaster also, because sometimes we say, okay, well, this CyberPatient should solve all the problems of the world. No, it doesn't. It will solve some problems. It will help some students. Our research has shown that it actually helps the low achievers and mediocre achievers, but it doesn't help actually higher achievers, because higher achievers, it doesn't matter if they read a book or they use CyberPatient, it's the same thing for them. So the other advices I have for you is to, when you make a medical curriculum, you gamify your medical curriculum, is to use 3 important methods. One is to see if you can use the already games made for other purposes. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. There are high-end coordination games that are made for car racing. And we use that actually in our medical education to see if that car racing high-end coordination would improve laparoscopic surgery for our residents, for our students. And the results was yes, it does. So it's nothing wrong to get something that is already there and have the same goals and purposes to use that for your goal and purpose. It's easy. So the second way to do that is to create a full game for the particular learning objectives. A full-fledged game is expensive to make, and it's very difficult to make. And I don't think a university would have the money, resources, and technologists and other content developers to support that. Having said that, there are very good games that are created for particular learning objectives. A good example would be a lab trainer that teaches laparoscopic surgery. There's a Euro mentor that teaches all urological procedures. There's tons of other very good machines out there that have the learning objectives, that has the methods of delivery, that have the content in there, that have specific cases, and the students can go through that as in a gamified fashion. It's very useful. We had also a GI mentor where the students used the GI mentor so much because they could do a gastroscopy like in a real patient without any concern for damaging the patient. So they did a lot of good work on that. So there are, and the third way is to gamify part of an existing curriculum by introducing elements of the game. That's easy, and that's the universities has the capacities to do that. So instead of developing a full-fledged game, you just take some part of your curriculum and say, okay, what is so difficult for students to learn? Is this part of the content? Well, let's make that part of the content an interactive, gamified, interactive with specific objectives and rules to call it a game. So that's the 3 advices that I would come up with, and there might be people who have better advices than I do. But whatever you do, it's important to consider, to focus that your game is a student-centered. Your technology is a student-centered. So you're making it for students, not making it for professors, not making it for somebody else. And also, it's important, if you're making this at your university, to start small. And then consider the scalability. Make it small, but provide the scalability in that small portion that you're making. I'm giving you an example of my own product. We did CyberPatient. We have lots of ideas to do CyberPatient. If I put all my ideas together, I would not be in the market for the next 20 years. And I wouldn't find even funds to do that. But what we did is that we thought, okay, well, the first thing we're gonna do is do simple and make the basic CyberPatient. Once the basic, like we have 130 basic CyberPatient product, and then it's now in the market and it's now there. Now we're expanding on that, bringing communication issues, bringing, for example, the other EPAs. We're bringing team training. We're bringing authoring tools. We're bringing other things into the system, slowly expanding the system. And if you do your gamified curriculum, please make sure that you revise that all the time. And it's so important to retreat and you do again, because you do that for students. So the student has to look at it, other students has to look at it, in different environment has to, the teachers has to look at it. And everybody who gives you feedback, you take those feedback and revise that to make it solid in stone. So now that we have had some ideas about the gamification process in gamification medical education, I'll give you an example of CyberPatient. So for those of you who are not familiar with CyberPatient, I just go brief about CyberPatient. Is an interactive simulation platform that is online, and we actually have about 100 we have a virtual hospital and virtual clinics with 120, 130 patients in it. And the patients are digitally enhanced, and students can go there and actually manipulate with them, play with them. And so it is, that's how it is worked. So it would improve your spatial learning. So it has all components of the learning process or care of the patient, from history taking to physical examination, investigations, diagnosis, treatments, and prognosis of the patient. It has a lot of good values. So the first thing is that it's a student-centered. It is competency-based. It accommodates style of learning, as we talked before. It improves decision-making abilities of students. It improves experiential learning. It improves compiled thinking. You remember we talked about this in the first lecture about compiled thinking and also about transfer of learning. So it provides a very solid base for transfer of learning. Now, I don't want to talk a lot about the research because of the time constraints, but our research has shown that that CyberPatient is much more effective than traditional textbook learning, and it's more effective for, as I said before, for mediocre and low achiever than higher achievers, and it's actually equally effective as a standardized patient, but it's 10% of the cost of standardized patient. But the important thing I wanted you to bring your attention as a game here, that we assessed this with 120 students in Kazan State Medical University, and we find out that students had the opinion that it improves, it had an impact of about 90% on their competency. So they become more competent, and they were saying that it was a lot of fun to work with the CyberPatient. So let's put this in a test and say, is CyberPatient a gamified platform? So based on what we discussed before, we can just go in here and actually look at this, right? So I put in here a table where you have elements, mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics, and in sub-elements for each of those elements, like rules, leaderboard. And then I had the CyberPatient, does it have it or not? And describe if it has it, where is that, right? So I did that just last night to make sure that I give you something tangible. So with respect to mechanics, the rules, yes, we have a 3-mistake rules, and those are very strictly enforced in CyberPatient all across. The leaderboard, we don't have a leaderboard at this time, because the leaderboard shows the performance of all the students competing with each other. We have a dashboard where a student looks at its own performance, and he could compare to the average himself as to the average of performances of other students, but it's not a competition. So we are planning to have a leaderboard, because my young talented people from students and doctors from the CyberPatient Club wants to have a CyberPatient Olympics one day. So we're gonna develop that later on. So rewards, yes, we do have rewards. We have certificates and so on. We have the points. Yeah, we have a scoring point for everything, for time, for performance, for knowledge, and actually we have points for cost. Do we have budgets? I don't know if we call budgets, but budgets are something that move when you move from one place to another place. You can be awarded a badge. In CyberPatient, you have history taking, and when you move from history taking to physical examination, you should have a badge, but we don't emphasize on that anymore for the reason I told you before, that we don't want this to be too much of extrinsic motivations for students. They know that. So we purposefully did not, although it is in there, we didn't make a badge for it to recognize it. But feedback, yes, we have an extensive machine feedback in the end of the CyberPatient. The progress, yes. We have an intelligent tutoring system that monitors your progress during your time from history taking to discharge of the patient. The other time press, yes, we have a time is monitored and scored actually. We have behavioral moments. Every section contains many behavioral moments actually. And going from the dynamics to aesthetics, is CyberPatient fun? Yes, I think most students, majority of students, like about 95% of students says yes, it's fun. Is it sensational? Yes, CyberPatient is fully sensational moments of wow, and wow effect is a lot. There's wow effect on CyberPatient, because when you're when you find out about the specific questions of specific drugs, specific things that you didn't know before, like wow, yeah, now I know it, so that moment is embedded in all in CyberPatient all along the platform. Discovery, yes, as I said, we do the discoveries. Challenges, CyberPatient has many challenges, so every section has a challenge to get into the next section, and that's why people are very much engaged. Our research shows that people are engaged between 40 minutes to an hour with CyberPatient. Achievements, yes, the feeling of achievement is there, the scoring is there, and there's feedback and so on. So considering all these elements, I would say, that yes, CyberPatient is a gamified product, but to make it a full-fledged game, we have to put the leaderboard and badges and make the competitions. Then I would say that it's fully a full-fledged game. So at this point, I think we have discussed the gamification, and you're familiar with the concept of gamification. We identified the main elements of gamification, which is the MDA framework, which stands for mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. We understand gamification in medical education, that it's important to have the goals, and it's important to have the feedback, and it's important to gamify the content and other part of the curriculum if you want to make that curriculum gamified. And you don't need to do the whole thing gamified. You could do maybe a specific part of the curriculum gamified. You can use other people's product to support your curriculum in relation to gamification, or that if they're related to medicine or not related to medicine, you could use them to support your curriculum. There are, we understand now that the concerns about gamification, and it's mostly about, changing the balance between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation of students. And to avoid that, we have to make sure that we do not bring a lot of emphasis on extrinsic motivation, but on the other hand, we should be able to increase intrinsic motivation that will be embedded in our game that you're building for our students to improve their education. And we talked a little bit about CyberPatient as an example. You may agree or may not agree with me. That's what I think. So I would like to, at this time, thank you very much for your attention. I think if you have time, you can ask some questions. Otherwise, we are planning a session maybe in the new year sometime, so that we can have a friendly panel discussion with me and some maybe other experts to understand the medical education a bit better. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Qayumi. I thought it was a brilliant presentation, especially the part about how to diminish the extrinsic factors from on medical education by adding recognition, challenges, curiosity into the curriculum. I have never thought about that. I think it was brilliant. So for the questions, we have some here in chat box, and that I will be directing to you. The first question that I see here is whether this the gamification strategy could be used for nursing students.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think it would be very, very useful for nursing students. It doesn't have to be medical students. It could be for allied health professionals, for nursing, for medical schools, undergraduate, postgraduate. There are some gamifications we're planning for maintenance of competency, even adult doctors and nurses. Yes, that would be a very good thing to do.
Thank you, Doctor. We have another question that's, I did not understand the difference between the dashboard and a leaderboard in CyberPatient. Could you please let me know?
Oh, okay. So the dashboard of the CyberPatient is a screen where you have your main functionalities, and you have some statistics. So if you finish your a CyberPatient, you will have your scores there. You would know in which group you belong. You know who is your professors. You know where your level of work is. So the dashboard is more informative for you as a person. Where the leaderboard is a big board where when you do competitions, you perhaps see this in Olympics, right? They have a big board where you have like Canada's here now with this many scores in Germany is here for this many scores, Peru is here for this many scores, and so as do they move forward, then they change those numbers automatically so that the whole world would know who is in the first place, who is in the second place, the third place, fourth place, who's moving faster or not. So whether it's skiing, whether it is running, and so on. So those kind of boards are also used in some of the stores for the best customer that go bang, and then they'll say, "Oh, you win $200, but it's or $500 because you become the first customer to do this or that." So these are that's more for status and rewards, but it monitors the progress of many people participating in the game, while the dashboard monitors the progress of one person, it's you, in relation to your studying. Is that clear?
Yes, it was, Professor. Thank you so much. We have another question, or more of a comment, that says, gamification may be expensive and lack of financial support is a serious constraint for broad implementation of gamification in education curricula in the developing world. Would you have any opinion or any comment about this, Doctor?
Sorry, it was a little bit internet problem.
Yeah.
So
I can repeat.
In the developing nations, that's what it is.
Yeah, it says that gamification may be expensive and lack of financial support is a serious constraint for broad implementation of it in education in the developing world. So, do you have a comment or an opinion about that?
Yes, I think gamification would be very expensive because people who gamify things in the electronic ways, it will be expensive, and people may not be able to afford that in developing nations. Having said that, before I go into the depth of that, I have to make sure that my friend, perhaps he is from a developing nation, he should understand that CyberPatient is free for all countries, all medical students who are in developing nations. And we define developing nation as a country whose GNI, stands for gross national income, is less than $4,000 per capita. So some people like us would make a corporate social, as part of their corporate social responsibility, they gave that free to the developing nations. And that's what we do, while it costs to the rest of the world, for a developing nation would not cost. There are some other problems that I do not like to talk at this time here. But what I'm telling to my colleague and friend here is that you don't need technology to gamify your curriculum. Gamification has nothing to do with technology. You can do gamification of anything with a normal circumstances. So you can make your classes gamified without any technology. I remember when we were doing laparoscopic surgery training, we used these laparoscopic equipment, training equipment, called simulators, that will cost perhaps $20,000 or $40,000. And not a lot of people could afford that. So what we did is we took just a box of that you put your shoes on, make some holes in it, and we actually could do this, have the same effect in that we had with $40,000 equipment. Actually, on low fidelity simulation and how to use low fidelity simulation. Dr. Richard Resnick, who is the president of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada at this time, and he was the dean of Queen's University. He is one of the top leaders in the world on medical education. He is actually spent most of his career at some point to make sure that people understand that low fidelity simulation is as effective as high fidelity simulation. So to support the developing nations, he has a lot of also big heart for developing nations. So that's that. With respect to simulation, you can simulate a classroom, you can simulate, we can do whatever. You can create this. But what's important for you to know that what changes a classroom to a gamified classroom is the three things, right? The three elements. It's the mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. So if you bring a goal in the class, bring rules on how to engage, and then assess them at the end, you can make that kind of a gamified process with your curriculum at any time, anywhere.
Thank you very much, Doctor. And to wrap it up, we have one last question that says, okay, interactivity is important and strategies to improve that is crucial. It's crucial. Young people would benefit much when things are more interactive, and then they can play more their part. Am I right?
Interactivity is important, and then what? Sorry. The last part.
Interactivity is important. Yes, and strategies to improve is crucial, because young people will benefit much when things are more interactive.
Yeah.
And in that way, they can make more their part. Am I right? That's the last part of the question.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Interactivity is so important. Interactivity is important for many purposes. I have no time. I don't have time now to go to elaborate on those theories behind it. But it is important because it would keep your memory, your working memory, keeps rotating, and it provides a better environment for your other memory to observe that. If you don't have that interactivity, the information goes here and just goes out. You forget about it. So interactivity is also bringing your attention. If you're in the interactive environment, you pay more attention. When you're listening or reading, attention span is about 8 minutes, and that's why when we do lectures, we bring slides and we talk about something that's not related to the lecture, so that you can wake up, so that I can take your attention back. Because after 8 minutes, then you would listen to me, but you would not hear. You would hear me, but you would not listen to me. So interactivity will be the main factor that would bring your attention constantly. Why CyberPatient? When we did the research, why CyberPatient is so effective is because most of the people have some level of attention deficit disorder, some level of not comprehending things, right? In addition to style of learning and all that other things. But CyberPatient is so rich with interactivity, it keeps the attention of the people, even if you have problems. So that's why people who are low achievers in medical school, after using CyberPatient, they become higher achievers. So the short answer is yes. The short answer is yes, it's important.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Doctor, for such insightful comments and answers on the questions that were posed here in the chat box. I would like to thank you and also thank our guests, our participants, from being part of today's lecture, and also for the ones that have been attending the other webinars, the other 3 webinars. We will be presenting a small survey for the participants that are here. And yeah, like all recordings will be made available on the CyberPatient platform, so that you don't miss any of what has been shared during this past few weeks. So if you bear with me just a bit. Okay. So this is the end of the session. The survey will be presented today. Thank you so much again to Dr. Qayumi and all our lovely participants. We will be seeing each other next time on another expert series. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate that very much. Love you all. Bye-bye. Have a good New Year.